It's time for Responseception. Pull up a chair and hunker down for the long haul, because boys and girls, this is going to take a while. So here's the first part of my response to his response to my video about Adherent Apologetics 36 Questions for an Atheist. Confused? Yeah, you probably ought to be. We don't get a lot of theist responses to videos around here, and I think this is pretty true across YouTube. Most of them have their comments turned off, so nobody can dare disagree, and the ones who don't, well, they usually just ignore any criticism anyhow. So I will give credit to Adherent Apologetics for not only keeping his comments up and reading them, but for actually responding to them. That actually puts him head and shoulders above the vast majority of theist content creators on YouTube. Good job, you deserve a round of applause. But is this a good response? I guess we're going to have to find that out. So this is just part one of his response to my response, and my response is going to get very, very long, fair warning. So go grab a drink, hit the bathroom, and relax. This is going to take quite a while.
This video is going to be the first part in a playlist in which I respond to Bitchspot blogs and his 36 questions to ask atheists.
Well, I actually responded to your video, and now you're responding to my response. So this is a response to a response, and now I'm making a response to a response to a response. Now, as I've said in previous Responseception videos, I really hate doing these when it gets to be too many layers in, because it both gets confusing trying to figure out what the old material is and what's the new material, and I figure it gets pretty boring just watching two people argue. So this is likely the only round that I'll respond to. Of course, if he wants to debate further, I'm always available via email, which can be found in the description. So, let's get started.
You see, I asked these questions first, and he responded.
Ah, that's much better. Thank you. Good show.
So in this video, I'm going to look at the first part of his responses. I'm not going to keep repeating his name because I think that's something very derogatory and something I would never call someone else. I don't want it to even seem like I'm calling him
I don't care. I told you that. Sticks and stones and all that. Anyone who is hurt by words, especially words that I personally chose, that person has some pretty serious psychological problems. Call me anything you want. I don't care. This isn't about people. It's about ideas.
So in this video, I'm just going to refer to him as him because he was not willing to give me his first name. He may later. I asked again. But I don't know, so I'm just going to call him him.
Because it's irrelevant. I told you to just make something up if you needed to. I don't care. And if you notice, I'm not worried about his name because I also don't care. I'm addressing what he said, not who he is. I'm not arguing with him. I'm arguing with his ideas. This isn't personal. This is conceptual. There's a difference. But regardless, like I said, call me anything that you want. As I keep saying, I just don't care.
So let's look at the first part of his response.
Okay, now before we get going, I'm going to do what I've done previously on other response to response to response videos, and anything that's old material, I'm going to put that in black and white to differentiate it from new material. Like I said, Responseception can get confusing, and I'm doing my best to make it easier to understand. So with that out of the way, let's begin. But these questions are not being asked honestly, and that seems to be a problem with a lot of theists. They aren't curious about what we think. They're trying to use these questions as a gotcha.
I just want you to know that this is a constant theme throughout this video, where he just calls me and other apologists just dishonest people and generalizes us all together.
And if you've watched any of the hundreds of other videos that I've done, you'll see that it is a demonstrable theme among the religious. This is especially true whenever the religious ask atheist questions, because they're really not asking questions in good faith to find out what atheists have to say. It's not a way of starting a rational conversation. There's an agenda going on, and it's blatantly obvious as soon as you learn to look for it. They are really trying to steer the discussion and, in many cases, shame the opposition into answering the way the theist really wants them to, so they can, as I said before, yell, "Gotcha!" and make some point or another. Now, let's be honest here. The questions he asked, he really didn't come up with them. He copied them off of an apologetics website somewhere or out of a book. These are very, very, very common questions. So even if he doesn't have that agenda himself, the questions certainly do. These questions are very leading, on purpose, and they've been asked so many times by so many people in so many places that continuing to ask the same questions over and over and over again, it isn't likely to get any really new responses. Now, that doesn't mean that he knows necessarily that he's just repeating the same things over and over. But 5 minutes with Google would tell him that if he bothered to look. Just saying.
All I want to say in response to this is that I'm just not some liar trying to make things up.
I didn't call you a liar. The part you're responding to isn't even addressing your video yet. But I've got a giant playlist of dishonest theists that I have responded to, so it's blatantly obvious that they do exist. Whether you want to lump yourself in with those people or not, that's up to you. But I didn't do it at this point in the video. You're just getting preemptively offended. You really ought to stop that.
If Christianity was false, I would have no reason to be a Christian.
Sure you would. Because Christianity makes you feel good. It provides emotional comfort and answers questions that are either otherwise distressing or that we don't currently have answers for. It just asserts things that the believer likes without being able to back those things up with objectively verifiable evidence. And that's the whole point. If you think about it, every religion out there can say the exact same thing. If Hinduism isn't true, then Hindus have no reason to profess the faith. If Scientology isn't true, then Scientologists wouldn't believe. If the flying spaghetti monster hadn't blessed everyone with her noodly appendages, it doesn't actually mean anything. Anyone can say that. It doesn't make it so.
It'd be a total waste of time.
I agree. So why are you wasting your time? Now, I get that you don't think that it's false, but in any intellectual question, the burden of proof is always on the believer. It's never on the skeptic. We don't have to prove you wrong. You have to prove yourself right. That's the problem with all religion. None of them can actually do that, at least not in any rational or credible way. It's the difference between evidence and rationalization. Because when we ask for evidence for these claims, all we ever get in response are rationalizations. We hear about your feelings. We hear about your supposed experiences. It's all based on emotions, not intellect. We asked for demonstrable answers, and we get unsupportable claims. It's why these back and forth sessions really do no one any good.
Like, why wasn't all this time dedicated to some fairy tale if I just believed it was a fairy tale? That'd just be stupid, a waste of time. I could be doing something better. I could be trying to make a bunch of money or something cool, but I'm not.
Just because you don't believe that it's a fairy tale, that doesn't mean that it isn't. And if the religious could just step back for a minute, they'd see it. Because they believe that other religions are just fairy tales. They think that the members of other faiths are just wasting their time, pursuing false beliefs. but they can't step outside of their emotional bubble and realize that they're doing the exact same thing. And they are doing it for the exact same reason that every other religious person is doing it. Because the belief itself makes them feel good. It fires off a dopamine hit in the brain and triggers the pleasure centers. It's an addiction, and the inability to see what's really going on, well, self-deception is a powerful thing.
So what does it tell you about my sincerity of my beliefs?
I don't care about the sincerity of your beliefs. I care about the truth of your beliefs. Your feelings don't matter. Someone can be entirely sincere and committed and still believe a falsehood. I'm not interested in how you feel about your beliefs. I care only whether or not you can back up your beliefs objectively, and we both know that you can't. And that's not your fault, because no theist can.
Also, these questions are not meant to be gotcha questions. These are honest questions looking to start an honest conversation with somebody who is an atheist.
Sorry, I don't buy it. You can go out there and find lists of these questions that are described specifically as gotcha questions. Questions that look suspiciously like the ones that you're using. Now, that doesn't mean that he intended it that way. I have no idea and no way of knowing what's going on in his head. But the stated purpose of a lot of these lists of questions is very clear. Big-name apologists pull this crap all the time. William Lane Craig, Matt Slick, the list goes on and on and on. We've looked at a lot of these lists. And the answers are out there too. Hundreds of atheists have responded, and no worthwhile conversations have ever come from it. It's intended as a springboard by the theist into conversion tactics, not discussion. This isn't about finding out what the opposition thinks and why. It's about finding a wedge that you can shove into their positions to get your message across. And that is inherently dishonest.
Pal, if you had anything that would convert us, you would have done it by now. You don't understand anything about us, nor do you care. This is just a sham. So let's look at the questions and see why it's all so dishonest.
Actually, I understand a lot about atheists, and some of my best friends are in fact atheists. And I care about the atheist community greatly, and I wish the best for all of you guys.
And that's cool. I have nothing bad to say about that. Of course, my question is, why? Is it because you want to convert us to your beliefs, or simply because we are other human beings on a planet where community matters? Because I care about people for the latter reason, and while this may not apply to our theist here, I've run into a huge number of religious people who only care about the former. So that's a legitimate question to ask, and I'm not putting any qualifiers on it. It's great that you actually care about atheists. But why? Why do you do it? Why differentiate between atheists and non-atheists at all?
Once again, at the end of this clip, he calls me dishonest.
Again, that's an introduction. I haven't even started to look at the video at that point. I hadn't even seen it. I do my video responses live. I don't watch the videos most of the time before I start to respond. I've just done enough of these to know the likely outcome. And sorry, I found nothing in these questions to lead me to any other conclusion. Now, whether our theist here was intentionally being dishonest or not, it's not really relevant. Whoever put this list of questions together, they certainly were. Anything developed for apologetic purposes is not inherently honest.
And all I want to say is that I will never personally attack someone or call them dishonest, especially someone I don't even know, because I think calling someone dishonest is a very extreme thing, and you should know someone very well before you call someone dishonest or a liar or anything along those lines.
You're making this personal, and it's not. You're just a face on YouTube, nothing more. I'm addressing your message, and you're treating it like it's a personal attack. You really need to knock that off. it's not an appropriate response. You don't get very far in life by freaking out every time someone insults you or attacks you or responds to you in a negative way online. Get away from being personally insulted and actually get to where I address your questions. I'm a third of the way through your video and you're still on the introduction.
Let's look at the next response.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
That's a nonsensical question that doesn't have anything at all to do with atheism or religion. And this question shows up on lists like this all the time. It's so that the religious can just arbitrarily claim that things exist because God made things exist. But how do they know that? How do they prove that? Why isn't it just as worthwhile to say Barney the dinosaur made it, or invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies made it? You can't prove me wrong, and I don't have to prove myself right, at least according to you people. So let's try to get to a question that actually means something.
First off, this question is very, very relevant.
And you're wrong. See, the question that you asked, why is there something rather than nothing, not how, but why? How is a legitimate question. It addresses the methodology for there being something here. It addresses the mechanisms by which something is here. Why implies purpose. It implies a decision. It argues that there must be a reason why one thing is true rather than the other thing. The problem is there is no reason evident. They're just trying to slip that implication in through the back door. It's why they will use the word created a lot. If it was created, well, there must be a creator, yada, yada, yada. Their usage of language matters, and you have to look at the words that they are specifically using. Had he said, how is there something rather than nothing? That might have been a legitimate question. But as asked, it's totally meaningless. It's just an attempt to push a religious agenda.
As any coherent worldview at least attempts to explain this question, even if it is, I don't know, but naturalism will probably figure it out someday. One of the 5 staple questions of any worldview is the question of origin. How did I get here?
See, that's the right question to ask. But if you ask, why am I here? That's not the same thing. Why implies purpose. How implies methodology. What mechanisms took place that resulted in me being here? Once you're concerned with mechanisms, you can start to look at the evidence and figure out the most likely answer based on objective, rational observations and verifiable testing and experimentation. Words mean things. How you phrase things matters. It's what's being responded to after all.
Additionally, I never said in this question, there is something rather than nothing, therefore God exists.
Nor did I say that you did. I said theists typically do. I didn't mention you at all. But this is a very common tactic. The assumption that because their beliefs must be true, that everything came from God. But if you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in God, as clearly is the case here, then those inherent biases just get in the way of worthwhile conversation. It is important to recognize your own biases so that you can dispose of them when they serve no useful purpose.
So instead of offering some theory about why the universe exists, he just said that the explanation isn't God and I can't prove that God exists.
That's not what I said. I said the question that you asked was not a valid question to ask. It has absolutely nothing to do with atheism or religion inherently. It might be something to ask a philosopher if you're bored, but these are supposed to be aimed at atheists and presumably have something to do with atheism. The question, as asked, does not, any more than asking why the sky is blue. It is simply not a proper question to be asking in this context.
Also, the cosmological argument is an argument for theism, not a specific religious belief.
Yeah, and it's also fatally flawed, as we've shown around here many many times. Now, granted, I can't expect Adherent here to know that, not having watched any of my other videos, and that's fine. That's understandable. But 5 minutes with Google would show how pointless the religious philosophical arguments actually are. There's nothing rational there at all, and once you remove these inherent religious biases, they fall apart even worse. The base assumption for all of them comes down to, I don't get it or I don't like it, therefore God. That's it. So throwing around some demonstrably faulty claims, you're not going to get anywhere with that. And that's just a helpful hint.
We can't look at the Kalam and say, okay, therefore Christianity is true.
But that is a very common thing for Christians to do. Note, I'm not saying that you do it. I'm saying that your typical armchair apologist on YouTube pulls that one all the time. At best, all of these arguments get down to a God exists, which is still a bald assertion. But the Christians who are using them are assuming that it's their God, aren't they? It's proof of their God, not some God, not some entity, not some undefined cause, but their particular and personal deity. When you stop and think about it, the arguments are pointless unless that's their assertion, stated or otherwise, because it doesn't get them any closer to demonstrating that their God is real if they don't make the assumption that he is. You only have to look at the formulations of these claims to see it. Yada yada yada, irrational argument, therefore God, capital G exists. It's really not that hard.
This reply also commits a red herring fallacy when he brings up something completely unrelated to what I was saying when he said, what if Barney created the universe?
Which was perfectly justified in response to what else I said. There is a clear pattern of Christians making the unwarranted assumptions that their God did it when they have no evidence that their God did anything. So yes, what if Barney the dinosaur did it instead? Or any other god that man has made up for himself to worship? It really doesn't matter. The assumption that it is their own personal preferred deity doesn't get them anywhere because they have no evidence whatsoever that their own personal preferred deity exists in the first place. It's just a claim made without evidence. Great. I can just make up my own claims without evidence. That doesn't actually get anyone anywhere.
And he never attempts to answer the question that I originally asked. He just deflected it.
And I've already addressed that, so please, move on to something worthwhile.
Finally, when he says that this question doesn't matter, this is when I became to be very troubled listening to this video. If you ask any philosopher, why is there something rather than nothing? They would say that this is a very, very important question.
But you didn't address this video to philosophers. You addressed it to atheists. If you had made a video called 36 Questions for Philosophers, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? I wouldn't have responded to your video, and you could go noodle your navel with someone else. What we're really seeing here is that all of the problems come down to your own personal poor choice of words. Take some responsibility for that.
Let's move on to the next clip.
Is there any evidence that suggests the universe is eternal?
What difference does it make? Again, this is more a question for scientists, not atheists. The answer is, we don't know, and neither do you. And it really doesn't matter because the answer doesn't lend credence to your beliefs one way or the other. So please, come up with better questions.
This question makes a big, big difference.
No, it doesn't. Theists tend to use it as a bald rationalization for their gods, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And as I said, this is just another case where he's asking questions to the wrong group of people. The fact remains, we don't know with any degree of certainty what might have come before the Big Bang, nor do we know for certain what might come later. We have a lot of ideas on the subject, but at present we do not have evidence to prove them to be likely true, and the fact is, we may never have evidence. And guess what? That doesn't make your God real. I don't know does not mean God did it. Again, this is an extremely common claim among the religious, but it doesn't really matter because it doesn't help the theist side one bit. And that's the point, and you missed it.
If the universe is eternal, there would be no beginning, and God would almost certainly not exist.
Which is a total non sequitur. The existence of the universe has nothing at all to do with the existence of any gods. There could be gods out there right now that had absolutely nothing to do with humanity or had anything to do with the planet, that had nothing to do with the universe, they have no interest in us whatsoever, and yet they still exist. The only way to defend your conception of your God is with evidence, not with these silly arguments. They get you nowhere. But unfortunately, it's all you've got.
However, if the universe is finite, then the universe would have an ex nihilo beginning, which would almost certainly lead to some sort of theism.
That also does not follow. That's an assertion without evidence. It's why these conversations never go anywhere. The only way to prove your side is to provide evidence that it is demonstrably and objectively true. You have not done so. You know you can't do so. Instead, you are just making baseless conjecture about things that you have absolutely no knowledge of in the hopes that you can sidestep your way around your requirements to put up or shut up. We can do this with absolutely any unsupported belief. See, we found these big footprints in the woods. Therefore, let me tell you all about our Lord and Savior Bigfoot. It's just nonsense. It doesn't get any better when you do it. There's only one way that you're going to convince skeptics that your God is real, and that's the way you simply can't do. Throwing empty assertions at the wall and hoping something sticks, that's just a complete waste of time. You lack the capacity to do what needs to be done. And that's certainly not our fault. That's your fault.
So the question of whether or not the universe is eternal is a really, really big question if you are interested in, at all, the question of whether or not God exists.
Well, I'm not. Not without evidence, anyhow. Again, this is just more proof of the inherent agenda. This isn't a series of questions for atheists asked out of curiosity. It's a means of preaching to and converting the heathens. That's not honest. It's an unwanted attempt at apologetics. This isn't, hey, here's some things that I wanted to know from a non-religious perspective. It's, hey, let me try to convert you by asking a bunch of targeted questions and expecting you to provide specific answers so I can lead it into a discussion of my religion. There's a reason that I'm calling this dishonest.
But let's keep it rolling and go on to the next clip.
If not, why do atheists hold on to this idea and say that you've debunked the Kalam?
The nature of the universe has nothing at all to do with debunking Kalam. Kalam debunks Kalam. Kalam fails because it makes irrational and fallacious claims, and the conclusion does not arise logically from its premises. Kalam, like all religious philosophical arguments, is faulty on its own. It doesn't need our help to fall apart.
So, in this clip, he claims that the Kalam is fallacious and contradicts itself.
Which is true. See any of my videos on Kalam. In fact, I've got a 4-video series where I debunk pretty much all of the common religious philosophical arguments. You cannot philosophize anything into existence. Philosophy is the wrong tool for the job. But it's the only tool that the religious have, because every time they try to use anything else, reality comes and smacks them in the head. It's not my fault that you fail so badly. You, in a general sense, not in a specific sense, of course.
But then fails to offer any evidence that it does.
I've already done that many times before. Again, I don't expect you to know that, having not watched any of my other content, presumably, but for my audience, they already know that. So few theists actually bother to respond, and I do thank you for giving it a try, but if I had to repeat everything in every single video that had already been established, I'd be making 2 to 3 hour videos and nobody would watch them. The information is out there if you just look for it. I'd be happy to link to it if you want me to, but you have to understand the realities of making regular videos on YouTube. It's just part of the game.
That's what we call a baseless claim.
You mean like the ones the religious spend all of their time making? It's only baseless if you can't do it. I can, and I have, so it's not.
If I say the earth is flat and then offer no evidence that the earth is in fact flat, then that would be another baseless claim, which is bad logic.
You mean like all of the flat earthers do? Because they have no evidence that the earth is flat. All they try to do is poke holes in existing observations and try to spin it their way, which, now that I think about it, that's all the religious do too. You have no objectively demonstrable, independent evidence for your God. Therefore, you pull out all of these silly philosophical arguments, tack "therefore God" at the end, and think that that's at all impressive. And I've already pointed out just how baseless that is.
That's what he does here when he says that the Kalam debunks the Kalam, but then fails to offer any evidence when doing so.
Been there, done that, have the t-shirt.
I'd love to hear which one of these premises is irrational in the Kalam.
Well, let's see. All of them. First, we have no evidence that anything has not begun to exist, at least in some fashion. So the modifier "begins to exist" is totally meaningless. It's just a bald assertion that there is something that didn't. William Lane Craig understood that the original version didn't make a distinction, and far too many people were asking, well, why doesn't God need a cause? Can't have that, so just move the goalposts around. The second premise, that the universe began to exist, is not particularly relevant here because we have no idea what came before the universe. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. The universe could have been expanding and contracting forever, if forever means anything where there is no time, and this is just the latest expansion. We don't know. There could be a vast multiverse out there, and new universes just bud off all the time. We don't know. Kalam makes a lot of assumptions that are not in evidence. And Craig, if you notice, adds a fourth concept to the Kalam, that an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who, sans the universe, is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and infinitely powerful. And he yanked absolutely all of that right out of his ass. There is nothing defensible there whatsoever. This, like all religious philosophical arguments, make claims that cannot be intellectually validated or supported, and then tack on an emotionally comforting conclusion that simply does not follow from the premises. Kalam defeats itself.
Because last time I checked, each of the claims of the Kalam are rational.
Then maybe you need to go back and look at it again without your religious biases. Because they are not rational claims. They are assertions made without evidence, claims that are not scientifically accurate, and frankly, the whole addition of God at the end is just laughable. You don't recognize it because you believe in God. We don't. It's why these philosophical claims don't impress the skeptical, only the people who already believe in the conclusion. They just don't stand up to any reason or rational scrutiny at all.
Let's keep going to the next clip.
If so, why do the vast majority of scientists reject this idea?
Which idea? That the universe is eternal? Who cares? Because it has nothing at all to do with anything. And this is what happens when the religious think that there's some kind of a mad conspiracy to prove them wrong. No, They haven't proven themselves right. They haven't even tried. You still have all of your work to do, and playing these silly word games doesn't give your position any more rational validity. Do better!
Once again here, we see him just not caring about deep philosophical and scientific questions.
Because you're still not talking to philosophers or scientists. You're asking these questions of atheists. Try to figure that out, because these questions so far have been irrelevant to atheism. It's like asking atheists how to make a banana cream pie. Who cares? These questions are not relevant to atheism, and you're aiming these questions at atheists. There's a serious disconnect here. And again, these questions are just a means to get to that gotcha. I don't know if he doesn't recognize that or what. Well, if the universe isn't eternal, then that means there had to be a creator. No, it doesn't mean that at all, but you've got an agenda to push. This isn't a question. It's the opening to a sermon. It's not a conversation. It's a way to wedge the other guy's opinions open to your own blind faith claims. It's like asking someone what their favorite flavor of ice cream is, only so that you can insist that they're wrong. These questions are not topics of conversation. It's a hit list. That's what people object to. And that's why it's all so dishonest.
Can you say that you are an honest seeker of the truth, willing to go wherever the truth leads you, if you don't even care about whether or not the universe is eternal?
I didn't say that. I said that, as an atheist, it is an irrelevant question to my atheism. I would say the same thing if you asked me what my favorite flavor of ice cream was on a list of questions aimed specifically at atheists. It is not relevant to the discussion at hand. You are not seeking answers about atheism. You're just fishing for an opening to shove your apologetics.
Like, this is a question the smartest philosophers have pondered for millennia. And then you're going to say that it doesn't matter?
Not to atheists. You're only fighting for any of these because they're on your list of questions that you can use to shove your God into the conversation. You've got the wrong audience. You've got the wrong agenda. And honestly, well, your honesty is suspect at best. This is the whole point, and apparently you simply don't get it.
Once again, if the universe is finite, there's a very strong case for theism to be made.
There is no case for theism to be made, because you cannot get from a finite universe to an actual, demonstrable existence of any God, period. That's a massive leap of irrationality. The only way to prove God is to prove God. All of this, it seems to me, thinking that the religious try to do is entirely unimpressive. Why isn't a finite universe a strong case for, invisible, intangible universe creating pixies, or a multiverse, or an expanding and contracting universe, or a million other possibilities? Because you don't like those ideas, so you reject them out of hand and plug in your own. And that's dishonest.
Whereas, if the universe is eternal, there's a very strong case for naturalism to be made.
There's a very strong case for naturalism, because naturalism is the only thing we have any actual evidence for. We have never yet found a single question to which the answer is demonstrably God. Not once. There is no reason to take these God beliefs seriously. The religious like to act like it's a 50-50 shot. It's either God or it's something else. But the chances of it being a God, based on what we actually know about the universe, are infinitesimally small. As I said earlier, it's far more likely that Barney the dinosaur did it, because at least Barney is demonstrably real. Whether you like that fact or not, it's still a fact. You cannot demonstrate God with these misinformed gotcha questions. You cannot demonstrate God by proposing God as an emotionally comforting explanation to ideas that you just don't like. That's when you get yourself into self-deception and delusion. And that's not an intellectually healthy way to live.
And I'd probably become an atheist if you could show that the universe was in fact eternal.
Then you don't understand, well, anything. And that's not a surprise because a lot of theists are the same way. But atheism is the default state. Rational people do not believe things without significant corroboratory evidence. That means that in order for any rational person to believe in any God, that God must be demonstrable, objectively, and yours isn't. None of them are. You believe for emotional reasons, not intellectual ones. You want there to be a God, and you are desperately rationalizing any explanation you can come up with to suggest that one must exist. And it doesn't work that way.
I'm also willing to concede that my beliefs cannot be proven to be true.
Then why do you hold them? Seriously, why do you hold them at all? Because I don't hold any beliefs which cannot be demonstrated with evidence, logic, and critical thinking to be valid, not proven to be absolutely true, but to be the most rationally justified position that I can hold given the current options. And if better options come along, I'll change my mind. But the religious, they don't work that way. This belief makes them feel good, therefore, to the exclusion of all else, they're going to cling to that belief because they would rather have the emotional comfort than have to deal with a potentially uncomfortable reality. This whole thing really is absurd.
But there's a lot of things that people believe that cannot be proven to be true.
There's a difference between proven and supported, so choose your words carefully here. Let's see if you can get this right.
I can't prove to you that my parents love me, and you can't either.
No, but you have evidence that they do, or at least it's a rational conclusion based on their behavior. And you can prove they exist in the first place, which of course is something you can't do for your God. And, in fact, you actually could prove it with an fMRI scan of their brains because love is just an electrochemical reaction in the brain that can be measured by modern medical science. So, as is no surprise, you're just wrong there.
But I'm sure the vast majority of us still believe that our parents love us.
And some people are wrong. There's a lot of people out there whose partners beat the crap out of them and abuse them, but they remain convinced that their partner really loves them. Now, I did a video on this a very long time ago, but essentially, I said that it's irrational to just rely on belief. Your beliefs can be wrong. You must seek to verify your beliefs with available evidence to see if your beliefs map coherently onto objective reality and to understand that your beliefs don't really have any meaning in and of themselves. Just because these things that you believe are comforting, that doesn't make them true. And it's the rational person who can step away from their emotional comfort and evaluate their beliefs rationally and intellectually, and most importantly, realize that these beliefs are unsupported and unsupportable from the currently available data, and therefore they need to reject those beliefs as nonsense in the real world. It's really sad that virtually no theists can do that.
This is because there's credible evidence for that belief.
And now you're moving the goalposts. Once you have evidence, you don't need belief, or in the religious sense, you don't need faith. Faith is just the excuse that you give yourself for believing in something that you lack any credible evidence for. Faith is not a virtue. It's something you really ought to be embarrassed by.
And in my opinion, there is the same credible evidence for Christianity.
Really? Where is it? Because this is the question that atheists have been asking of believers forever, and funny, they can never come up with any. This really points out the difference between evidence and rationalization. Evidence is independent of belief. It exists regardless of one's personal ideas about it. Rationalization, and I'll give the dictionary definition here, is the action of attempting to explain or justify behavior or an attitude with logical reasons, even if these are not appropriate. That is exactly what the religious do. They take a position to which they are already emotionally beholden, and then they look for reasons, any reasons, even if those reasons make no sense, to justify it. When the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, absolutely everything looks like a nail. When your primary belief is in a God, everything starts to look like your God did it. You lost your car keys and then you found them? Well, God did it. You got a new job? Well, God is responsible. Never mind all the resumes and the relevant experience and all those interviews you went to. It's all God. The utter absurdity of this is just overwhelming.
Finally, I just want to say that these questions aren't just a word game. These are honest questions.
But they're not. You might be unaware of what else they are, but they're not honest. Because if you notice, all of the answers that he wanted people to give, they all open up the door to him pushing his God. He didn't make this video because he was genuinely curious about what atheists might think on any of these various subjects. He had an agenda. He had an idea to push. It wasn't idle curiosity. He asked as a backdoor to preach to the non-religious. And this response just proves that. I know this is just part of his response, but if you notice, all of the questions he's addressed so far, none of them have been applicable to atheism. Atheism has nothing to say about the universe. That's science. If you want to know those answers, go ask scientists or philosophers. Atheism is the lack of belief in gods because of the total absence of anything remotely resembling objectively verifiable evidence. That's it. If you want to ask about that, feel free. I'll be happy to answer your questions. But those questions don't come with the inherent agenda that pretty much every one of these sets of questions that we get asked by the religious do. And frankly, that's just dishonest, even if you don't recognize it as such.
I also hope the viewers notice a constant pattern here of him not answering my questions, but rather just claiming that there's no evidence for my beliefs.
Ask better questions. Ask questions that are actually applicable to atheism. You don't want to talk about the agenda going on behind the scenes, if you even recognize it, which, now that it's been pointed out, I hope that people learn how to identify it. But as I always say, these videos are not being made for the atheist. They're being made for the believers. They are phrased in such a way that those who already believe feel justified in continuing their beliefs. Nothing on this list, at least in this first video, had anything at all to do with atheism. It's all a sly wink to the believers, saying, see, we got it all right. And that's not impressing anyone.
That's it for this response. Next time I'm going to look at some of his objections to the fine-tuning argument, but I just wanted to give an overview here of these first few questions, and I hope all of you have a great day, and I hope that you personally believe that you are willing to follow wherever the evidence leads you, even if it leads you to a different understanding of the universe. I know I'm willing to.
And I don't think you are. Remember the difference between reason and rationalization. Which side of the fence do you fall on? I'm willing to bet it's the wrong one, but I look forward to your next response regardless. Anyhow, apologies again for making such a long video, and I appreciate it if you made it this far and got to the end. I don't know that there's anything terribly new here, but it's important to point out the misconceptions of the religious, and this gave me a perfect opportunity to do so. See, I find more often than not that the religious are simply unaware of what they're doing. It's why they ultimately ask gotcha questions. If you go look at the list provided by Matt Slick or William Lane Craig or a number of other professional apologists, they even detail what responses the Christians should be looking for and how to respond so they can preach to the unbeliever. We've been over these lists before. They're in the playlist someplace. And even if the theists don't go into it thinking, aha, I'm going to show them, It's still the reality of what they're asking. They don't really care what we have to say. This isn't about genuine curiosity. It isn't about trying to learn more about the other side. It's about trying to find a place to insert your religious beliefs into the conversation and hope for a conversion. And that's not honest. It just isn't. It's looking for an innocuous way to push your faith on someone who has absolutely no interest in it. And sorry, but that's underhanded. Trying to slip it in under the radar so that no one notices what you're doing, that's inherently deceitful, even if it isn't intentional. This guy doesn't care if I think the universe is eternal or not. It's not a burning question in his mind. He cares if he can make a religious point out of my answer. And I'm not playing that game, because I've seen it dozens and dozens of times before, and so have all of you. But I guess we'll have to see where this goes in the future. My thanks once again to Adherent Apologetics for taking the time to respond. And I guess I'll catch you all again next time.
Bum